Nepotism often ends in bland celebrities with medium talent that we, as the public, have been coerced to love. But this could not be further from the case with Simone Rocha, who has grown to be one of the most respected and talented designers in the world, far surpassing her father's legacy. But how? Simone was born to John Rocha, who British people may remember from John Rocha that sold in Debenhams when we were children. He also had a mainline self-titled brand with his wife, which closed in 2014. The Diffusion label closed with Debenhams as well in 2019-2021 after they had an extremely long decline in profits, which left them failing to make their appropriate payments to their property lending company. One day I might make a video on the legendary John Rocha because his brand story is absolutely fascinating, especially as Simone, who was born in 1986, 3 years after John Rocha's incredibly successful first label, Chinatown, was able to attend fashion shows from the age of only 3 months old. Since then, she was consumed by fashion as an inescapable part of her life that she flourished in naturally, learning and developing not only her design skills, but her skills of business as well, which is an oft neglected yet painfully important part of building one's own fashion brand. This knowledge was made available to her through working at her father's studio between the ages of 13 and 18 years old while she studied at the National College of Art and Design, graduating in 2008 with this surprisingly strong collection that featured many of the brand's identifiers fans would come to love, all before she moved to London to pursue her own fashion education with a master's from Central St. Martin's. She graduated CSM in 2010 with this Autumn-Winter 2010 collection that's kind of just okay. It's not bad, but it's also not exciting. I literally couldn't find one review of her first collection, which I thought was quite unusual because there were several sites published around this time just saying who she was because of her father, just without a review, so I'm assuming that they also had little to say about the collection that was largely very uniform. Even 3 out of the 11 looks were almost exactly the same. I think if I was being kind, I could link that uniformity to Irish school uniforms, which she undoubtedly wore throughout her time in school, but in reality she hasn't ever referenced that since, so I think it's a shame she didn't use the time to make more of a splash. Although this was where minimalism was the fashion, so it's definitely forgivable, especially when we see the early stages of one of the earlier Simone Rocha identifiers in tailoring, and the development of 3 very important identifiers that were started from her BA graduate collection in sheer fabric/netting/lace, a juxtapositional black and white color palette, and deconstruction. But despite me saying that the graduate collection may have been a tad lackluster, it clearly caught the eyes of the right people because just a few months later, she began showing with Fashion East for their Spring/Summer 11 show. Both Central St. Martin's and Fashion East are known for being very discerning with their talent and being unswayed by nepotism. Even Stella McCartney is rumoured to have been rejected twice by St. Martin's before being accepted. So I don't think her father actually helped her get this position, but I do think this collection is where we can really see her talent shine through far more than her MA graduate collection. We can see the return of her tailoring and deconstruction themes, as well as the introduction of florals and the reintroduction of blush pinks from her BA collection, which are all now staples for the brand. Needless to say, despite the brand only having one stockist, her dad's shop on Dover Street in London, not Dover Street Market, but the literal Dover Street, this collection was a hit, which was then succeeded by an even better collection in Autumn-Winter 11 that not only had most of the brand identifiers mentioned previously, tailoring, juxtapositional colors, sheers, deconstruction, and blush pinks, which give consistency to the new brand, making it more desirable for buyers, but which spawned these plastic brogue shoes that became a talking point in London to the extent that they became brand staples in and of themselves, and their success thereby allowed a Topshop collaboration with Simone for a 6-piece collection, and I think if memory serves, this was also the first collection stocked in Dover Street Market as well. From here, the brand was able to go solo for her Spring/Summer 2012 collection, which ended up being by far her most successful collection to date. Pieces from the collection were spotted on Lady Gaga at the absolute height of her fame, which in itself had a Vogue article written about it, only then for Gaga to wear one of Simone's Spring/Summer 12 dresses on the cover of Elle just a few months later. Since then, the brand really grew around her talent and core product season on season. However, one thing that seemed inescapable was the comparison to her father, who really at this time was at the height of his career. When he stepped down in 2014, his namesake brand, which was also showing in London Fashion Week alongside his daughter, was still incredibly successful. So naturally, it was hard for her to break away, as we can see in this article as well as in interviews like this one, where she expresses concern over this. But something I will say is quite admirable is that unlike when Brooklyn Beckham went viral recently for saying that he got his fancy car from his chef work, she never shied away from crediting her parents for giving her her start and actively acknowledges that it was her father and mother that helped make her business viable from the very beginning. Even in this interview, which happened around the Autumn/Winter 2012 collection, she has a full team working with her, which would be nigh impossible for a brand for their first solo collection without financial support, which I'm assuming came from her mother, who was actually her business partner at the time, which suggests to me that it was her mum who was the financier, although both her parents, who she is still very close to, still help with the business to this day. Simone's ability to acknowledge where she came from but still prove her talent as distinct and commercially viable is evidenced in these years. She won several awards, including the 2013 British Fashion Award for Emerging Talent for Ready to Wear, the New Establishment Award in 2014, and in 2016 the British Women's Wear Designer of the Year Award, as well as Harper's Bazaar Designer of the Year Award, just to name a few. Actually, it was the Autumn/Winter 2015 collection that I think is the pinpoint of when Simone Rocha found their niche in a clear pivot. This Autumn/Winter 15 collection that I think finally perfects the brand's point of view in subversive femininity. There's nothing inherently new in the Autumn/Winter 15 collection, and it wasn't particularly well received at the time. She's not reinventing her own wheel, and she's not known to do that either. Simone likes consistency, so nearly every collection is just taking the puzzle pieces that she has enjoyed before and finding a new way to present them in a way that is both fresh and reliable. Vogue has said this collection was a circumscription in her innovation, a pause to her hot streak. But in hindsight, this couldn't be further from the truth. Instead of it being a break, it now reads much more like she had been experimenting with signatures, silhouettes, and colors to find her brand's viewpoint, which now in Autumn/Winter 15, she finally found and decided to give us a flex of confident, unapologetic self-identification. This period was really the main push of the Simone Rocha brand into being respected as its own entity, and pushed it out of the shadow of her father, even to the extent that in August of 2015, she was able to open her own store, which her dad helped design, on Mount Street in Mayfair in London. Mount Street was a pretty legendary space at the time, with shops like Christopher Kane, Roxander, and Nicholas Kirkwood, who were also the toast of the fashion town in the mid-2010s, occupying spaces there. So to align herself with these creative elites was an incredibly smart move for her brand placement and public perception, further helped by her guest designer role at J Brand for a capsule collab collection that was released to rave reviews and a lot of press, getting the Simone Rocha name out to more of the public. The collection featured a lot of that pink colour that Simone often refers back to, with her now signature ruffles, which debuted in Autumn/Winter 14, but this time all in denim, a fabric Simone doesn't really lean towards, so it offered something fresh for her customer, as well as serving as a great entry point product. From here, the mainline Simone Rocha brand focused on consistency, putting out season after season of greatly creative yet completely accessible and commercial collections that all fit within the Simone Rocha world. Then, every few seasons or so, displaying a collection that pushes the box just enough further, like the Autumn/Winter 17 collection. The collection began with these military-inspired oversized jackets as a far cry from her usual Louise Bourgeois-inspired overt dreaminess. Frankly, it was a real shock to see this from a brand that had cemented their brand image so securely in etherealism. Though, the coats were somehow still completely believable to be within the same world due to the similarities in silhouettes. In fairness, the fabrics were also brand consistent, but in this colorway and without fabric manipulation, don't necessarily read consistently enough to draw parallels between this and previous bonded velvet pieces from the brand. As the collection went on, we saw core product development, though much less than usual, and instead the collection played much more into the militaria theming. Even the florals used were common poppies, which are a known symbol of the peace after war. But despite how far removed this collection was from the usual product offering, it was extremely well received in the press for pushing her brand image and expanding the Simone Rocha universe to a place that may not be as gracefully void of conflict as we had once thought. Following that wonderful collection came a collaboration quite unexpected when she was announced as number 4 for Moncler's Genius line. As one of only 8 designers in the world invited to be a part of the project, Simone Rocha infused her signatures with Moncler's to create an immensely powerful collection that looks almost dystopic in presentation. The garments themselves were an interesting development on Simone's style by introducing both a new fabric and a new texture being something that Simone has been consistently inspired by through the years in a way that seems obvious when observing the Moncler collections that ended up running for 4 seasons. Meanwhile, at her namesake brand, we once again see a level of consistency with the product offering, still pushing the box little by little until her next leap forward, which I think can be argued in 2 separate times, either in spring-summer 2020 or in autumn-winter 21. This next leap forward came through a development of embellishment applique, mostly in the form of ruffles, but in a way that feels very comme des garçons over street market, almost more extremely Lolita. Spring-summer 2020 is really the first development of this style of design to this height, to this level. Though technically it was begun before, she likes to incubate her ideas as we discussed previously. So here is just the first instance of the flounciness and ruffle applique in this way to bring in a newly adapted aesthetic. Whereas Autumn-Winter 21 pushes the idea even further to the artistic side with much more exaggerated ruffles and deconstruction, even going as far to introduce leather into the mix and a whole new tutu-inspired silhouette. So the argument to be made is, was Spring-Summer 2020 the leap forward for being the originator, the first time the aesthetic was harnessed, or is Autumn-Winter 21 the leap forward because it pushed the aesthetic to the limit and perfected the Simone Rocha take on that inspiration? I think for me personally, I could see an argument for both, and there's aspects to both that I like better than the other. Perhaps there really isn't a solid, notable pivot point for this development of the brand's aesthetic, and instead my favorite era of the brand, the one we're currently in now, was born of development and adaptation over a few seasons. This would indicate that the development is consumer-based as well, which makes that even more interesting. Adapting to what the consumers want is obviously very important skill for any fashion label, but is obviously slower, due that the design team needs to creatively adapt just enough each season to understand what their buyers and subsequent consumers are wanting from the brand. Hence why it may happen over the space of 4 seasons. So, following this design leap came an exposure leap for the brand, in the form of her incredibly successful H&M collaboration. This collection featured around 100 garments as well as accessories, and I think this was both her first children's and explicitly menswear offerings as well. Unfortunately though, the menswear was a bit uninspired and honestly a little bland, considering all the pieces are just ordinary garments with fake pearl embellishment, which anyone could easily make at home. But the women's wear was exceptional, featuring a plethora of best hits for the brand with now an accessible price point. We have a gingham dress, which was first shown in her Fashion East show in Autumn-Winter 11, this coat from Autumn-Winter 13, this tartan ruffle from Autumn-Winter 14, and this jacket also from Autumn-Winter 14, and just so many more. Though most notable of all of these were these earrings, which were a more accessible version of the Simone Rocha mainline earrings that Meghan Markle wore, which in itself had a bit of a viral moment. Needless to say, the collection sold exceptionally well and introduced the brand to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people that may never have heard of the label before. So many more eyes were on her Spring-Summer 22 and Autumn-Winter 22 collections than ever before, and they were both exceptional collections, continuing on the consistency that fans have come to know and love from her work. All of which brings us to the show that just showed, Spring-Summer 23. As expected, the collection fits in so well with Simone Rocha's previous works and features more of a light and colourful palette than the winter collection before it, which I suppose is obvious for most designers, but because of her juxtapositional colouring, it seems more obvious and noteworthy. The collection is strong as well. More of ethereal subversive femininity, lots of frills and classic Simone silhouettes, meaning this collection will undoubtedly sell really well when it comes into stores. I haven't read the show notes because I couldn't find them in time, but the show seems like it was again inspired by Louise Bourgeois, which, to be honest, I am assuming that because I think the references in the egg-shaped and the wide-hipped silhouettes that have become synonymous with Simone are very obviously inspired by Louise Bourgeois pieces, like this 1978 sculpture that was part of her show Confrontation, or this 1996 untitled piece that both show similarities into the silhouettes that we just saw from Simone Rocha. But what's interesting about this show is that this is the first time Simone has shown menswear under the mainline label, and to say that it was the showstopper is no exaggeration. It's so unapologetically Simone Rocha, and it brings that subversive femininity to menswear without sacrificing cohesiveness across the collection as a whole in a way that many brands fail to do so when showing men's and women's together. It's also very smart to show signatures in menswear from the military originating in Autumn/Winter 17, the frills, juxtapositional colour palette, the obvious Louise Bourgeois influence, the pinks. It's literally all there, even in the suiting, which is also so perfectly Simone Rocha. Simone is an incredible designer, and this show is just one of the many extensions of her true talent. Her story might be fraught with accusations of nepotism, at least in the earlier years, but she has clearly proven herself time and time again, and actually seems to quite like having her family around to help when needed, like her mum with the business side or her dad designing parts of her first store. As she is, it seems very much like her business is at the top of the industry, and at the top of her game as well. So I'm interested to see where it goes from here and what tactics they use for brand extension. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one. Check out the full playlist of designers on the left, or check out my two most recent videos, Who Decides War or Grace Wells Bonner, on the right.